Picture this. You wake up in a Europe where the sky above you isn't just a beautiful backdrop anymore, but a highly protected zone. A continent where every single border is linked up to this massive defense network, working together like one giant invisible suit of armor. Now, today, we're not talking about some sci-fi military fantasy. We're talking about a real historical turning point. What if Europe decided to stop relying on borrowed protection and actually built a self-reliant shield to protect its own cities, its coastlines, and its future? Welcome to This Explainer. I am so incredibly excited to guide you through this fascinating thought experiment.
So this brings us right to a massive central dilemma. If Europe actually pulled this off, would the continent really become safer, stronger, and more independent? Or would this completely unprecedented move just trigger dangerous new tensions, fresh power struggles, and maybe even a global arms race? Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about missiles and radars. It's about identity. It's about sovereignty, fear, and ultimately trust.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the concept and technology, the economic boom, the political friction, the global recalculation, and finally, the social promise. Let's get started.
Starting off with Section 1, the concept and technology, or what we're calling an invisible continental armor.
You know, for decades, Europe has kind of lived with this hidden question lingering in the background. Exactly how much security should it be building for itself? Especially today, with threats becoming increasingly invisible. We're talking incredibly fast missile tech, dirt-cheap drones, and entirely silent cyber attacks targeting infrastructure. So how do you actually build a solution for that? Well, a modern European defense shield wouldn't be some clunky 19th century fortress, and it definitely wouldn't be a single physical wall. It would have to be a living, updating, heavily connected ecosystem. It basically means transforming Europe from this patchwork of separate national armies into one highly coordinated strategic unit, capable of detecting and responding to threats across a massive geographic area.
And building that ecosystem, that is a massive, thrilling technical challenge. We're talking about seriously layered protection. You'd need long-range radar systems detecting threats super early, dense satellite networks tracking movements from space, physical interceptor missiles, and electronic warfare units ready to scramble hostile drones. But the absolute game-changer here is AI coordination. Artificial intelligence would have to step in to analyze threats in real time, instantly pulling data from multiple countries to slash response times down to just mere seconds.
Moving on to Part 2, the economic boom and building the future.
Look, let's be real. Building a defense shield of this magnitude is going to cost an absolute fortune. There is just no getting around that fact. But it would also trigger this massive industrial and technological wave. Because a military project of this scale simply wouldn't stay confined to the military sphere. It would spill over directly into civilian life, completely reshaping supply chains. We'd start seeing the rapid development of better sensors, way faster computing, much more resilient communication networks, and highly advanced manufacturing. Think about all the jobs created in AI, engineering, and materials science alone. In the process of building a shield to protect itself, Europe could literally become one of the most advanced defense technology zones on the planet, completely modernizing the continent along the way. And there's a really fascinating economic psychology at play here. Resilience attracts capital. Stability attracts planning. Businesses and global investors, they care deeply about stability. A functioning, highly secure continent that proves it can protect its ports, its financial centers, and its transport corridors, even under immense pressure, sends massive signals of confidence to global markets. And that is exactly what attracts long-term growth and investment.
Which brings us to Section 3, the political friction, the ultimate sovereignty test.
Now, obviously, you can't build something this massive without some seriously intense internal debate. Europe isn't just one country, right? It's a collection of very diverse nations, so this project would be the ultimate test to see if these nations can truly think and act as one. For a shield like this to actually work, it requires a rapid, highly integrated central command. But that operational necessity, the need for speed, clashes directly with a very real fear, the loss of national sovereignty. Countries would have to agree on who exactly is giving the orders and figure out just how much independent military control they are actually willing to hand over to a central institution. Finding a balance that's efficient enough to be fast but legitimate enough to be trusted, that might honestly be the hardest part of this whole endeavor.
Let's actually break that friction down a bit, because the internal divides are incredibly complex. You have large nations who might worry about footing too much of the bill, while smaller nations are terrified their voices will just get ignored. Then you look at Eastern and Western Europe, and they often have entirely different historical threat perceptions. Meanwhile, Northern and Southern Europe might prioritize completely different types of regional risks. So simply agreeing on what counts as a shared threat across all these different budgets and historical backgrounds is a monumental political hurdle.
But here's the thing. If they can somehow overcome that friction, something really profound happens. By securing the digital and space layers together, actively protecting things like hospitals, banks, and satellite networks as one unit, Europe's entire military psychology would shift. The mindset moves away from just defending individual national borders and shifts toward defending a cohesive continental network. It essentially overlays a brand new, shared strategic identity right on top of their traditional national identities.
Next up, Section 4, the global recalculation, or how this shifts the entire global map.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how a self-reliant Europe forces the rest of the world to totally recalculate their own strategies. Because power isn't just about the weapons you have, it's about perception. The United States, for example, might see this shield as a sign of healthy independence, but they might also wonder if Europe is deliberately trying to reduce its transatlantic dependence. Russia would almost certainly view a powerful shield like this as a hostile barrier to its own influence and pressure tactics. And China, they might interpret this as hard evidence that Europe is solidifying into a totally self-contained, assertive strategic bloc. Once a continent proves it can actually protect itself, the entire global map of influence just shifts.
So it sets up this fascinating dual nature. Does a giant shield deter a conflict, or does it actually provoke one? Well, honestly, it's probably a bit of both. On one hand, you definitely have deterrence. You're raising the threshold of success so high that an outright attack becomes highly unlikely. But on the flip side, you run the very real risk of provocation. Rivals might react to this shield by developing even deadlier weapons, intensifying hidden cyber warfare, or actively trying to divide Europe politically from the inside. The battlefield doesn't disappear, it simply moves from visible confrontation to a much quieter, high-tech escalation.
Regardless of how rivals might react, though, the diplomatic reality for Europe changes entirely. Leverage comes from resilience, bargaining from confidence rather than anxiety. If Europe no longer feels totally dependent on external powers for its own protection, it can speak with a much stronger, more unified voice when it comes to trade, sanctions, and diplomacy. It transforms the continent from just being this massive economic project into a true geopolitical actor.
And finally, we arrive at Section 5, the social promise, a declaration of maturity.
So what does this whole massive technological and political undertaking actually mean for daily life, for the very soul of European civilization? I love this quote from the source material. It reminds us that a defense shield doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It protects the cities where people live, where they work, and where they build their families. It protects the basic routines that make civilization feel, well, ordinary. In that sense, the shield is not just a military machine. As the quote says, it is a social promise. It is a declaration of maturity. It signifies a continent finally taking permanent responsibility for its own fate, instead of just waiting for someone else to show up when there's an emergency.
But, and it's a big but, the social outcome here really depends entirely on how the whole project is managed and communicated. Done right, it could foster a deep sense of confidence. Citizens could feel a calming sense of preparedness and peace, knowing their critical infrastructure is locked down and protected. Conversely, if this is mishandled or if leaders fail to communicate clearly, it could easily spark paranoia. Everyday citizens might start fearing that the continent is turning into some sort of militarized fortress. The shield absolutely must be understood as a tool for prevention, not a tool for aggression.
Which leaves us with a really lingering thought to wrap up on. If Europe actually went ahead and built its own defense shield, would it become divided or united? Fearful or confident? Militarized or peaceful? Because a shield is never just metal and code. It is a mirror of the civilization that creates it. If it's built with unity and restraint, it could be a monumental strategic achievement. But if it's built fueled by internal rivalry, it could just become a new source of tension. The ultimate question is whether a continent can truly protect its future without surrendering its soul. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will see you next time.